Hello and welcome to Channel CBA News at 128. I'm Jack Jackson, coming to you live from my basement. Tonight we have a very interesting story about today's rising college education prices. But before we start with that, let's go to our meteorologist, Donald Donaldson. Donald?
Well, as you can see, Hurricane Pancake, it's making its way through Florida.
Thank you, Donald. And now on to tonight's special about the rising prices in college education, brought to you by CBA's own Robert Robertson. Abandoned at birth and raised by wolves, Robert Robertson is the premier special update reporter, bringing you the best of CBA's most hardcore stories. This is a CBA special, The Rise in College Fees.
Why are college prices so high? Why are students having difficulty managing these college loans? Why did I just walk out of a dark room? The first two of these three questions will be answered on today's CBA News Special. There are over 6,700 colleges and universities in the United States, with nearly 1,000 of them charging over $21,000 a year. Prices haven't always been this high. Public school tuition rose 2.9% in the time between 2012 to 13 and 2013 to 14. But surprisingly, the significant increase is the smallest over the past 25 years, since 1975 to 76. Between 2003 and 2013, however, college tuition prices have grown nearly 80%. The next closest areas with this kind of a rise were medical care at 43% and food and beverages at 31%. With this massive increase in college prices, students are becoming distressed. I put in my investigative suit and met with one of these distressed students. I'm here today with Sabah Mahmood, a student at what university?
Loyola University.
And how much does that cost?
$42,000 a year.
Are there any other expenses you have to take into account?
There is room and board, which is an additional $10,000 to $11,000. And then if you're a first-year student, you are required to have a meal plan, which is another $2,000 a year.
I wonder how a student like Sabah manages to fund her college education. $40,000 a year seems like a lot for any student from any area of the country to handle. So, Sabah, what is your opinion on these rising college prices?
I believe it's ridiculous because, first of all, I have my own part-time job, but I'm getting paid minimum wage, so that's not even enough for my own expenses. And then on top of that, my parents make less than $100,000. And although they make a decent amount of money, I have 5 other siblings, and they have to raise them too, so it's not enough money.
5 other siblings?
Yep, and they're all still in high school or middle school or elementary school, so by the time they come to college, the price will be so high they can't even afford to go to college.
Sounds like your family has their work cut out for them.
It's not only my family. I bet you anyone else that's watching this show feels the same way.
And she's probably right. Studies have shown that students are increasingly choosing colleges based on price rather than other variables, like extracurriculars or choice of major. So when it comes down to it, college price is often the make or break factor for many students when they choose a college. So the question is, why? Why have these prices risen so high? To find out why, I met with an economist. I'm here with world-renowned economist J. Quellen Luna. So, tell me, why are college prices so high?
Well, because they want to keep the student-to-teacher ratio a little bit low. So they're trying to compensate for the teacher salaries. And when you hire more teachers, you have to pay them more, obviously, so they take it out on the students and they make the college prices go up.
So they're basically hiring more staff members?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they want to keep the quality of education high, so they raise the prices for that.
What Dr. Luna means by student-to-teacher ratio is simply the number of students per one teacher teaching in a classroom. Thus, the small number of students per teacher usually results in a higher quality education. In order to keep these ratios low, colleges hire as many teachers as possible so that they can avoid having lecture halls with dozens of students in them. But the problem is, prices have become so increasingly high that students cannot foot the bill on their own and thus have to take out various different kinds of loans. I wonder how our student friend Sabah Mahmood plans to pay for her college education. So Sabah, how do you plan on getting through this?
Well, I'm going to have to do what every other student does, and that's take out loans. My parents themselves haven't paid off their own loans since when they were in college. So it's going to be a struggle for me.
Are there any other ways you can get money?
There's also federal aid and state aid, but they aren't doing their job. They're not giving enough.
That's very unfortunate now, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is.
And our friend Sabah is certainly not alone. Family incomes have fallen 13% from 2010 to 2014, and inflation-adjusted incomes was lower in 2012 than it was in 2002. As a result, the number of federal loan borrowers increased 69% so that students can pay for their education. Although it varies widely by states on how they fund college payments, we take as a case in study Georgia and South Carolina, because they are the most generous states in terms of aid per student. However, 0% of Georgia's aid is needs-based, and whereas South Carolina's needs-based aid is a mere 16%. 60% of college graduates graduate with debt, and the average amount is $26,500. Many students have begun to wonder, is this massive price tag of higher education worth it?
But it's becoming a struggle for students to afford these college payments. Is it worth it?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting because we don't know, should colleges really be charging this much for education? And this is where we try to ask ourselves, should somebody really intervene? And my answer is yes, specifically the government should do something about this.
Dr. Luna brings up an interesting idea. Our neighbors of the great land of Canada have the type of system which Dr. Luna is suggesting. Canadian higher education institutions vary in their structure by province, as per the Constitution Act of 1867. In general, funding for these institutions is 45 to 50% from the provincial government, 20 to 25% from tuition fees, about 10% from the federal government, and about 15 to 20% from other sources. So, roughly 60% of the funding comes from the government. Canadian higher education institutions have no incentive to charge ridiculously high fees. Although costs vary, the average tuition in Canada is $2,400, although in Quebec there is no cost at all. Meanwhile, the average tuition in America is about $9,000 for an in-state, state-sponsored university. However, many students go out of state, or to a private college, which means they are more expensive. Because of these low costs, many American students have decided to forego the American system entirely and go north to pursue their degrees.
So would something like the European or Canadian system of education be closer to the correct approach?
Yeah, I think that they have it a little bit closer to what I would say is the ideal system, but obviously not full-blown socialism. I think that the government should have a little bit more of a role in paying for college, not a full laissez-faire as it is right now. But yeah, they have it a little bit closer. They should definitely intervene and help out students because right now the burden is a little too much.
So government regulation, but not full-blown control?
Exactly.
We're making some fascinating discoveries about the rising prices of college tuition. This special segment of CBA News will be back after a commercial break.
And I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. And I looked, and behold, was death. Saying, come and see. And I saw. And hell followed me.
Oh, my wallet! Oh, it was just a dream. And now we return to today's special CBA News segment about the rising prices of college tuition.
And now we return to our interview with Sabah Mahmood, student at Loyola University.
So why do you think these college prices are so high?
I think they simply don't care. Although they are aware of our poverty levels, they just get away with charging us for unreasonable fees.
So it all comes back to greed.
Absolutely. I believe that there should be someone behind all of this that should regulate the prices so it's at least somewhat reasonable. If we're out here trying to get an education, then it should at least be at something that we can all afford.
It seems that Sabah agrees with Dr. Luna. Someone, like the government, should regulate the prices of colleges to keep them at least at a certain, affordable threshold. Since the increase in college prices has surpassed the rate of inflation, students like Sabah need someone to help them get through the financial challenges of college. If the increase in prices stayed with the rate of inflation, then the average college tuition price would be around $2,000. Instead, it has been able to reach an average of about $9,000, which I mentioned earlier. So the prices have increased, supposedly to compensate for teacher salaries to keep that education quality high. But that just seems too simple. This has been a dramatic rise in prices over a very short period of time, perhaps because of greed like Saba suggested, and when I asked her where she thought the fees went, she balked. So where do you think all of these fees go?
That's a great question because honestly, I don't even know myself. For room and board, that fee is understandable because you have to pay for the buildings the kids live in and the heating bill and all that. But for the tuition, that's just too high. The books even are not covered by the fees. Books children have to buy separately.
So the cost of books isn't included in your fees?
Not at all. You have to buy your own books, and for each class, one book is a good $100 to $200. So when you add that up with the tuition, that's just too high for any child to afford.
Sabah can't even tell where the fees are directed to besides the obvious expenses like housing. And on top of that, the very high fees do not even contribute to the purchasing of the pricey textbooks that students are required to have for class. I decided to sit down with the Loyola administrator to ask him why the prices for his college, and those like his, are so expensive. I'm here with college administrator Dr. Collins Collinsworth from Loyola University. So, Dr. Collinsworth, why are your prices so high?
Excuse me?
Why are your college tuition prices so high? Don't you think 40 grand a year is a little bit steep?
Well, if you can't afford it, then you shouldn't be going here.
Quite the interesting opinion from Dr. Collinsworth. He believes that if you're simply not privileged and wealthy enough, then that is simply too bad for you. It seems that he's neglecting the brilliant minds of the lower socioeconomic classes when his administration accepts students. But when they do accept these new students, what exactly are they paying for? So then where does that 40 grand go?
Well, there's obvious teacher expenses, there's the living expenses for the housing for the students, etc.
So are you hiring a lot of teachers?
Well, yes, because we want to keep Loyola's education quality high and that student-to-teacher ratio low, so we see it as necessary.
But is that trade-off worth it?
Well, what's the price of education? That's the question, and 40 grand seems like an appropriate price for a Loyola quality education.
A justified price? Maybe justified by his administration. He seems to be bypassing the answers to my questions and instead keeps reassuring me that it is a good price and tries to leave it at that. But I wasn't going to back down that easily. So how do you account for this rise in price?
Well, of course, we're constantly hiring new teachers to keep that education quality at Loyola high.
But don't you think 40 grand a year is a lot?
No, can you stop calling it a high price because it's a justified price. Please stop bringing that up.
But that's a lot of money.
No, I'm done. Goodbye.
And now on to the next segment. Dr. Collinsworth decided to avoid my questioning entirely since he did not appreciate me calling his college's prices high. Well, maybe if they were not actually high, then I wouldn't have called them that. Anyway, education quality as a justification for high prices is rather misleading. Often a college's number of administrators exceeds the number of faculty, so colleges say that a large number of teachers is necessary to keep quality, so they hire more. However, even though teachers don't need to be replaced by machines, there is technology, like better microphones, that allows a single teacher to reach more students. Universities charge what people can afford, so aid and cost is not evenly distributed. Many scholarships go to the smartest, the least wealthy, or minorities, forcing more affluent, white families to bear some of the burden. Schools also cross-subsidize, meaning that some areas get more adequate funding, while others get inadequate support. Basically, schools charge as high as they possibly can per person. I wonder how much it will cost for our student friend Sabah by the time she gets out of college. By the time you graduate Loyola, how much do you think your college expenses will be?
I think it's all going to mount up to a good 200 grand.
Over 200 grand? Wow! $200,000 is a lot of money for any person, especially for a young man or woman over the span of just a few short years. It is highly likely that Sabah will graduate with large amounts of debt, as do many other students of her age at schools of her price. She will probably struggle with her expenses for a long time after her graduation, as many college loans do not get fully paid off until many years later. So this brings us back to the question, is it worth it? So how do you think you'll manage your college experience?
Well, it's going to be a lot to juggle with a social life, going to classes, actually doing the homework, and then continuing my part-time job. But I feel like that's how college will shape you into an adult.
So despite the expenses and stress of college, Sabah still thinks it will be worth it for her. The American desire for economic prosperity and well-being, especially from a good education, outweighs the material costs of high education. It is simply another obstacle for the students to overcome. So what's being done by the government to try and fix some of these problems that so many students are facing? Obama himself has brought up this topic in his speech at the University of Buffalo, New York.
Now, it's true that a lot of universities have tried to provide financial aid and work study programs, and so not every student, in fact, most students are probably not paying the sticker price of tuition. We understand that, but what we also understand is that if it's going up $250 and your incomes are only going up $16, at some point families are having to make up some of the difference, or students are having to make up some of the difference with debt. And meanwhile, not enough colleges have been working to figure out how do we control costs, how do we cut back on costs.
He stated that colleges will not be ranked only by how selective they are or how nice their facilities are, but by how student-friendly they are when it comes to fees and tuition. This will hopefully get universities to consider lowering their costs. However, these rankings will not be released until 2015, leaving students like Sabah out in the cold. Furthermore, Obama will ask Congress to fix payments on federal loans at 10% of the student's monthly income, but he set this deadline for 2018. So, at least something is being done to try and lower or at least control these costs. Until then, students will unfortunately have to cope with the high prices of college. Thank you for watching today's special segment of CBA News on the rising prices of college tuition. This is Robert Robertson, signing off.
Thanks for that fascinating story, Robert. That concludes this day's episode of CBA News at 1:28. This is Jack Jackson, signing off.
Little strokes fell great oaks.
Oh,
Mr. Gerber.
that would be great. Okay, fine.
We're having bloopers!
Maybe, I don't know.
No, maybe. I doubt it, but
No.
possibly.